You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Levitt.
Thank you, Rachel. This is Mike Levitt. You are listening to And If Love Remains, and this is actually part 2 of the conversation we started with Dr. Elias-Axel Pettersson. I hope you enjoy the show. Because you've been on kind of all sides of this as a competitor, as a judge, and as an organizer. So I want you to put your judge cap on a little bit and and maybe take us through what your and we've kind of prepared this a little bit. So we're gonna I don't know, cheats right? We're gonna use a piece. Why don't you introduce the piece that we're gonna do? And take you through from a judge's perspective what you would be listening to with this specific performance.
Sure, and I'll just say that when we're judging, it's very difficult. And I always thought, as watching a competition, oh, it's so obvious, And then when I've been a judge in something, it's like, oh, this is not always so obvious. It's very tough. And even judges I've worked with many judges, and I've done a lot of competitions here in Arizona, but also in New Mexico and in Canada and in other states throughout the U.S. And it's interesting to see the other judges' perspective and what they're prioritizing. And you both might think you're saying the same thing, but you're saying something else. So you both might say, oh, I'm looking for musicality, but then the way you describe that or evaluate that is different. So there might be an interpretation that emphasizes X, Y, Z, and those aren't really on my priorities list, but I'm listening for TUV, and I hear it more in one other performer than let's say A than B, and so I say, oh wow, that person really did exactly what I was looking for, and I wasn't even paying attention to X, Y, Z, but another judge says, oh well, they really messed up on these parameters that I've been listening to, and I was like, well, I didn't even really listen for those, or maybe I disagree with that, or I don't think that was as big an issue as you're claiming it. Those kinds of things, it's so easy to go way off the rails and just have disagreements. Luckily, I've been in situations so far in my life, knock on wood, that I've worked with some really great colleagues and a lot of friends, people I know, people I respect, and so it's gone quite smoothly. I haven't had any, things come to shouts and brawls and arguments, and we've worked through it. And
now, when you're working on a jury, do you work together, or
so typically you work individually, and then you talk at the end and kind of compare notes. So whenever I'm working, we're usually sitting at this same table or kind of close to each other, so that we get the similar perspective of the performer, and we don't want an unfair angle or advantage, or, oh, well, you were hearing it differently over there, that's why you gave this person a lower mark. And so we all have our notes, we all have the score, the music to follow, and we can make whatever comments that we want on our comments sheet. And afterwards, we kind of give them a mark for ourselves. I kind of have my own system and my own scale when I judge. And then at the end of a round, for example, or a category, we'll all meet and talk together and say, okay, here were the 15 pianists we heard. What stands out? Are there some that are obviously in contention for, a prize or something like that? Mm-hmm. And then we start to compare and whittle things down. Okay, maybe they're possible first or second or third or honorable mention, or this person's not a prize, but maybe we could give them a special award, those kinds of things. And then it kind of gets down to the nitty gritty. Okay, why do you choose this one is 1 and this one is 2 versus I chose this one is 1 and this one is 3 or whatever. And then you start to discuss, well, I was hearing this and they really brought this out. Oh, it was a different piece. It called for that, and so I thought maybe we could go through some of those criteria that we look for, and then try to do it with one of my own pieces. And I'm a little bit reluctant and hesitant because, it's like those reaction videos.
Well, we didn't pick the easiest piece.
Right. So there are nowadays that there's such a it's a thing really to do a reaction video. I haven't jumped on that bandwagon yet, but usually it's a reaction video to somebody else. I'm going to try a reaction video to myself of a piece I recorded about 10 or 11 years ago.
And before we do that, I want to ask one other aspect of judging that I don't think many people appreciate, or maybe it doesn't matter, or should it matter? And that is the visual aspect of it. I mean, so many times when we talk about music and we're talking about it as an oral experience, we talk about it, it's art for the ears, but it really is a performance art. And so how does the visual experience of being affect the judging, and should that affect the judging?
Gosh, these are tough questions. And each of these questions I could spend an hour talking about. This is, I mean, again, something that's hotly debated. And I'll tell you, one field of classical music has tried to do away with the visual aspect entirely. When you go for an orchestral audition, a lot of them are blind. Right. They're behind screens because historically, women have been marginalized. They haven't made a lot of the top orchestras. They haven't maybe gone to the top schools and then been allowed the opportunities to even apply for these positions, which are very coveted in, New York Phil or what I think, is it Vienna Philharmonic or Berlin that still has a rule that says only men can be in the orchestra? I don't know, but
didn't know that.
There was a long-standing rule with one of the European orchestras that only men could be in the orchestra. And I don't know if that's, only recently been,
that's so quaint.
That glass ceiling has been shattered. Most of the other, all the other big orchestras, I should say, in the world have female players.
Sure.
And even the conductors, that's much more rare to have a female conductor. And the big name I can think of right now, Maren Alsop, is sort of a trailblazer. She was the first American female conductor to hold the post of a major orchestra. I think it was Baltimore.
But race plays a factor. Body build plays a factor.
Yes, all of these things. I'm trying to think. There aren't too many conductors of big orchestras these days who are very large people. There's one famous one. I can imagine him. He has a great recording of Scheherazade, Rimsky-Korsakov. He's very large. There aren't many minority conductors, although there are more and more. There are more, like Seiji Ozawa was a huge trailblazer, as a Japanese conductor. He was one of the first major Japanese conductors, and now you've got Kent Nagano and some others that I don't even know. There are many young ones that I don't know, up and coming. There aren't too many black conductors, but they're becoming more and more well known, and a lot of schools are accepting more into their classes. And so, a lot of minorities are starting to see just barely now a surge. I think one of the greatest conductors today, Gustavo Dudamel, he's a wonderful conductor from
but beyond
Hispanic conductor. He's in LA.
Beyond that, like the actual the drama of performing, the whoever is sitting on that bench playing the piano, how important is it that they bring that visual aspect of the drama to the piece? And again, I know it's a complicated question because it's not just subjective, but it almost goes to the heart of what the art actually is, and it's difficult to kind of like grasp. Because if you're saying like there's this visual aspect to it, does that mean the music is or the sound is less than, or what does that mean? I don't know.
Right. Well, I think getting back to it is a visual art as well, and there's a visual aspect to the experience of a live concert, and that's why I think live concerts are so important. It's very different from listening to even the greatest high quality CD with wonderful speakers in a soundproof room. It's not the same as being in a recital, and that visual aspect is important. So while the sort of orchestral method of auditions is important to get the best player as part of a group per se. When you go see a concert, especially a piano recital, you want to see movement. I think now that movement has to be tempered. That movement has to be part of the music. But a lot of the composers that wrote these sort of flamboyant pieces wrote in a certain way for the keyboard that made you have to jump, or made you have to leap quickly, and that would do something. And what's always fascinating to me is when I play pieces for my students who might not have seen, any great performance or any professional pianist, but a lot of them mentioned, oh, well, that person was, their head was moving or this. And I just think like mechanically, if they're producing a lot of sound or they're somehow pushing, I don't like to say pushing into the keys, but dropping a lot of weight into the key, there's going to be a counteract, a counter force. That's just physics. And yet they have no problem understanding that if it were a sports thing, like if you were to run into a tackle in football and somehow you're stopped and then your head kind of jerks to the side. Why did his head jerk to the side?
Right.
It wasn't in the same, there's some sort of chain reaction going on. So somehow they don't seem to translate or understand how that could be in music. And what that often does is, there are caricatures of pianists, and this is very old. There are paintings of Liszt playing where an artist would draw a huge shock of red hair because he had, very beautiful, long flowing hair and just, overzealous and just flowing all over the place as if that's all he's doing. He's just a rock, headbanger basically in the 1800s. And that's not what it is at all. It's not only that, but that's part of it. That has to be part of
that Tom and Jerry cartoon. Of him playing
the Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody.
Yes, I mean, come on.
yeah, it's over the top, but and so you have to know what's over the top and what's working with the music. I'll give you a good example because when it's over the top, it often is histrionics is what we call it, and there are some. You can tell when somebody has maybe a certain tick or a certain can't think of the word right now, but habit that kind of keeps coming up with a certain passage. But if you compare two pianists who are very famous, Lang Lang, who's maybe one of the most famous pianists ever, Chinese pianist, and Grigory Sokolov, Russian pianist, they both move quite a bit, but in very different ways. And I would say that I do respect both of them. I'm not here to to berate either or whatever. But Sokolov is actually one of my favorite pianists. I'll put that out there. Lang Lang has gotten a bad rap for just being a visual performer and a showman without the musical substance to back it up. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes he plays pieces where it's way too obvious that he's making too much of the extra musical things like the hand motions or the looking up at the sky to be inspired by God as he plays or throwing the hair back, And that's not always indicated in the music, or it's not really matching the music. Whereas Sokolov moves a lot too. His hands, he throws his hands. I think he raises his hands maybe higher than any other pianist I can think of. It looks like he would not create a good sound. It looks like a child banging almost all the time. When I see him, I'm like, how is he playing the piano like that? And yet somehow every time he makes a motion and comes down the way he does gracefully or whatever, the sound is just perfectly, rounded, and the motion that he makes fits the gesture that he makes fits the gesture of the musical intent, if you will. The sound that comes out, I'm like, that motion relates to that sound perfectly. But when Lang Lang does it, it doesn't always work. Now, sometimes Lang Lang in his element, I think, can play, I've heard him play things where I'm like, that's probably the best in the world of that piece. Like Debussy, I've heard him play. It's just gorgeous. But anyway, it's hard to kind of say movement is bad or movement is good. Movement has to relate to the music and somehow have a connection to it and make sense. So,
okay. No,
but again, that's partly subjective.
It is, but I think it's important, for people to remember, any instrument, whether you're singing or playing the violin, but specifically playing the piano, it is a physical experience. Yeah. You are, it's a no joke aspect that when you're done practicing or playing, you're going to feel like you've been running for a few miles. It's not going to be like, if you can really injure yourself if you're playing certain passages and not having the right counterweights or allowing your body to support those fingers. You're going to injure yourself pretty badly.
Yeah, if you don't have the right technical foundation, there are just numerous pianists, especially at conservatory level, that just they're pushed too hard. They're not ready for it. They don't have the foundation. The teachers are expecting more, perhaps, or they're expecting more, and they get tendonitis. They get all sorts of hand problems and arm problems. And
Right.
I've been lucky to largely avoid all that. Although there are a couple of years where I practiced a lot, and it's like, oh boy, I can see where this would go. And it's a wonder that some of these concert pianists that play 150 concerts a year can maintain their body. But I think a lot of people don't realize just how demanding on the body it is to play. You know, when I play a concert, a full length concert, I usually lose about I usually have to drink a liter of water after I finish. It's as if I ran, like a 5K or 10K. That amount of perspiration because of the pressure too, and the nervousness, and your brain is at full functioning speed, and your brain consumes a lot of energy.
If we were playing a video game, it'd be considered God level what your brains are doing. Yeah. And you taught me this, and I think this is such an important thing for people to realize. Like when you're playing, and I love, like, as a thought experiment, I do this all the time when I play now, is I try to imagine. And again, this is straight from Elias, the man.
Oh boy, I'm nervous. What did I teach you?
No, I think it's so perfect because it's so impossible, yet it's so necessary. Because you have to do it all instantly, and that's, you have to put in your mind, imagine in your mind the sound that you want to create perfectly, and then try and make that sound and evaluate whether you did it, and then at the same time, how do you incorporate that sound, whatever you made, how close or far away you came from the perfect sound, how do you incorporate that into the next sound to make it as perfect as possible? And it becomes this like vector of thinking, because you're always thinking, what did I do? What am I doing? What am I going to do? And it all has to happen simultaneously. And you can't, in order for the brain to do that for that many minutes, for that many hours, sometimes it is incredibly exhausting.
Yeah. I didn't come up with that, by the way. I think every pedagogue and trainer at some point has. I mean, Leon Fleischer is famous for using that example of pianist A, B, and C in your head, and kind of use that a lot. But you're right. You're always reevaluating what's happened and thinking about what's going to happen. I will say that no matter, you do have to have some sort of technical foundation so that you can produce the thing that you're imagining. Yes. Because a lot of teachers at the very highest level, Juilliard or whatever, they're getting students that already are so good that they can just basically say, well, imagine this or imagine that, and somehow it can translate. And I'm thinking, gosh, here in the trenches, I'm teaching students who maybe can't lift two fingers, that can't make them clear. How are they going to imagine something and play it?
Tuck that thumb. Get that thumb.
Yeah, so there's got to be a bit of technical support and foundation to know how to produce a sound, and then you can go from there. But yeah.
All right. So this was a big hour-long preview for our mock judging session.
Oh boy, I've been trying to avoid this. No. So we're going to listen to a piece that I played and recorded many years ago in Montreal. I think it's from 2009. Let me check. And it's of a Rachmaninoff etude. So he wrote 2 books of etudes. This is from the second book, Opus 39. And there's
we're gonna stop and play it as he's doing this, as he's reacting to it. But I will also put a link for people to listen to this recording, because it is quite good. And he's gonna be hard on himself, I think, because that's how he thinks. I kind of don't
want to be, but I will. So the link, we'll post the link. What I would encourage you to do is pause the podcast right now if you're listening in, and go to the YouTube link and watch it. And I actually have 2 versions of this. So one, but I'll tell you the one to post, the one where it's just alone. It's me with a blue shirt. And when I had long hair, yes. Those were the days of, I was never a headbanger, but I had very long hair.
And I'm going to ask you to do the impossible, which is show you, because I really want you to go over like the great aspects. Like if as a judge you hear something and you go, wow, that was impressive. Don't be afraid to give yourself props, because
Yeah.
that's one thing that I want as a layman. I want people to, as they're listening to it, maybe become a little bit more sophisticated in their concert experience and listening experience, where maybe they can pick some of the stuff up.
Well, I can set some of it up already because I know that this is a hard piece. So if I were a jury member and somebody came on stage to play this, I already have certain expectations. Like, okay, either this person, I have two kind of ways that this could go. Either this person is extremely good, and even if they're a younger student and playing this, I'm like, okay, they're a very advanced student. Their teacher knows that they're capable of doing this. It might not be professional level, but it's going to be good because it's very hard. Or this student or whomever is playing it is delusional and thinks they can play it, but just has no concept of how the piece should go and should sound, and maybe hasn't even listened to recordings of it. And by the way, I've heard both of those aspects when I've judged, not this piece per se, although I have heard this in competition, but I've heard other pieces in competition where it's like, okay, either this is going to be wonderful and we can talk about it, how it can be better, et cetera, or this is going to be a mess and it's going to, be a train wreck.
Right.
So we're going to listen. This is the Etude-Tableau in C minor, Opus 39, number 1. Pause the podcast, take a listen to the link that's on, and then we're going to try to go through this. This is the first time we're trying this, so I hope it works well. I'm going to play it from my phone, so that the recording quality might not be perfect. That's why I urge you to hear the YouTube video first, and then we're just going to go through it and get my thoughts. Okay.
All right.
So here we go. Well, okay. I got to pause it before we even start. Off the bat, I always say that I can kind of maybe we're living in a day and age where we can't judge by many things, certainly not by look. But looking at myself playing here, it's not a great angle because of where the camera was. But when I see a pianist, I think when they walk on stage and or how they prepare themselves to start playing is very indicative of the kind of sound and the focus they're going to have. And usually I'm right on that sort of stuff. And if not by the first few notes or by the first phrase, I know if this is going to be, a very good performance or it's going to be pretty shaky. So I would say off the bat, I look pretty comfortable. It looks a little bit like I'm straying there, but the hand position looks good. And it seems like I'm very focused and in a good position. Good hand position. Everything looks very aligned, and I'm ready to go. So, okay, that's my initial thought before I start playing. Here we go. Oops, I didn't turn the volume up. Sorry. Oh. Let's try that again.
Take two.
So take two. Yeah. Okay, so we'll just go through the first phrase because right here is where it repeats the original motive. And already I see that there's a really good swell in the sound. So in the score, I haven't looked at the score in many years, but there are crescendi marked and decrescendi. And so Rachmaninoff wants this very sweeping atmosphere in this piece, like very broiling, if you will. And so I think I capture the essence quite well. It could be even more. I would love it to be, now that I've heard this piece and my own recording so many times, I would love it to be even more sparkly. Like the notes, it's going by so quickly. And I have to say, watching myself play, it looks quite easy. And I've seen some comments that, it looks so easy when you're playing it. I assure you it's not. But I try to make my movements, I'm one of those that doesn't move that much. I don't think when I play. And I try to make my movements as economical as possible. Because there are a lot of jumps and a lot of fast things in this piece. So far, it looks like it's fairly economical, but I would love a tiny bit more clarity. That kind of a little bit more
like more rhythmic clarity.
Well, it's kind of like I would like more of the I can't speak it as fast as it's going, but
right. But
a little bit
a
more,
little more
that,
separation.
Yeah, like
almost.
Sparkling fingers. My teacher always used to say.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Okay.
It's still quite good. It's very clean, but it's not. I've heard some recordings out there, by some famous pianists, Lugansky and Ashkenazi. I mean, they're some of the greatest, and it's just a little bit more pristine and clear in the sound. It's a little bit more pingy to the sound. So, but anyway, so far good sound, good voicing. The bass. This is an amazing piano in an amazing hall. So what can I say? The bass sounds great.
you let it do its thing.
Yeah,
huh?
just let it do its thing, and it's a very rich sound. So I do like that. Okay, let's keep going here. So another thing that I'll talk about, I mean, that was quite clear and fairly convincing. The pacing of this piece is very tough to control. Where do you take slight pauses? Where do you finish the phrase and go to the next one?
It's it's so frenetic. It's just so overwhelming.
Yeah, and it's like, where do you take the breath in that freneticism, if that's a word? But I feel that there are some times in my phrases, I know this is a bit of a habit too, and my wife always hears it because she's great at this kind of stuff, but the ends of my phrases are almost a little bit clipped, and I would love for them to be fleshed out a bit, to just breathe into the next phrase. So that might sound a little esoteric, but I feel I'm jumping the gun just a tiny bit on some of the last
when you say that
notes.
to me, that sounds very technical. I mean, that sounds very much like, okay, somehow, whether by hook or by crook, you need that sound to last a hair longer,
Yeah, it's like if you were reading a poem or just some prose, and there's a period, and so you have a little bit of a pause, period, and then you go to and somehow you, at the end of that phrase, you would just like almost skip over the period and start the next word, and it's almost like a run-on thought.
Yeah, it's mumble rap.
Yeah, so it's not maybe quite that bad. But it's
not. It's definitely not.
But there are a couple points where I'd love a little bit more. If I were listening to this, I would say, okay, just breathe at the end of a couple phrases.
Okay.
This
next
section.
As a judge, that might be a note that you make, like, hey, allow yourself to breathe, or So with that, I mean, I'm also kind of thinking of this as a player. I mean, because there's a couple ways to combat that. Number one, you can slightly not retard, but you can give yourself a little breathing room through tempo, or you can also do it through dynamics and volume. Where you're kind of making a section a little bit quieter that allows that to sing through a little bit better. Yeah. So is that something you would think about?
All of those things that you mentioned are tools. And the question is, how does the artist combine those tools in the best mixture possible to make it? So maybe the end of a phrase gets a little softer, so you can take, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's a loud phrase, so you can't use that option as much. But maybe the last note, I think if you can hear the clarity of the last 2 or 3 notes, I always tell my students, listen to the last 1, 2, 3 notes of a long run. Those have to be clear. And if those are clear, your ear is taking a tiny bit more time to process them. And that's all the time that we need as listeners to hear that. And that's all the time that the phrase needs. Yeah. So there are registeral differences. If it's very low in the bass, you might need a little more time because it's, takes more time for the ear to process than if it's very high, high register. So
and like you said, it depends where you're sitting in the audience, how you hear those notes. I mean, there's a lot of factors.
Yeah, but wherever you're sitting, a low bass note will still take your ear, or a very low harmony that's very thick will have more overtones. So your ear will still take more time to process. Your brain will take more time to process it. So just a little more breathing or space to set that next phrase. So here we go into some, and it's pretty clean so far. I will say that really I think I miss one note in these chords coming up, and then I get back on. It's very thick, so it's hard to tell, but I'm pretty sure I missed a note in the middle of this chord here. But anyway. So I'll mention another thing, because now that we have these chords in the top, da, 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 repeating, I would be listening for, okay, how clear are those and how controlled are they? And on top of that, the left hand is jumping from a low bass note to something in the middle, and there's almost a voice that comes through in the middle line. Rachmaninoff is very famous for this, weaving some sort of voice in between the two outer voices, if you will. So this three-handed effect. Liszt does
for
that.
sure.
Yeah, Thalberg does this.
If you want a really great example, I think my favorite example from Rachmaninoff is his G minor prelude.
Yeah,
that middle section
G minor prelude. Yeah,
it's just beautiful.
Yeah, the middle section, you really get that middle voice coming in. Da, 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 da. Yeah. So he loves to do that. And I know this piece, and so I might be listening for that in a performance. Like, is this pianist aware that there's that inner voice, and are they bringing it out? Are they bringing it out too much? Is it being punchy? Is the tone quality still good? Is it very like a voluptuous tone, a warm, lovely, rich, round kind of tone? Or is it just hammered out because my teacher told me this is the middle voice, so I have to do it, kind of thing?
Yeah.
That's kind of obvious to tell. So
well, and again, in this context of like, you have this very jagged sounding piece, and then you have this middle, like you said, this middle voice that is more voluptuous, more rounded. Like, can you make that happen? I think you do a good job, personally.
Yeah, well, the next section that's coming up is the sort of B section of the piece, and then it gets back to this rumbly stuff, and you'll hear how the total aura and color shifts, because the top, which was kind of very now becomes very effervescent and just twinkly, like a shimmering kind of accompaniment, and the middle voice really comes out. So we'll see how. I mean, I know how it sounds, but I'm going to pretend for the audience. We'll see how this performer handles it. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Okay, so by the way, I wish there was a little more clarity in there, but I love the very smooth shifts that I make between the harmonies, and that I'm reacting a bit to the harmonies. And there's this very interesting inner voice that comes in the top of the right hand there, da, 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 which I think a lot of people don't. They either play a wrong note on top. I forgot if it's like a 10th or an octave now. But I just heard that come out, and I realized, okay, that's actually what's written. And that's what's going to lead, because it's in the register, the tenor register, if you will. That's what's going to lead to this really beautiful theme that's coming up. So if I were listening to this, I'd say, okay, this person is well aware of what's going on, and did bring that out. And it could be a little bit clearer in some places, but we'll see how it goes. Okay. So this is the place I'm talking about, where there are these pings on top. Da, 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 and then in the middle, you have this very gorgeous, it's just a simple chord that's outlined. But it's very pretty how it descends. And that's coming out. I would love, ideally, I would love even more distinction between the levels of sound. So I feel in this section, you've got to have sort of, let's say, 4 levels of sound. I would say the bass has to be pretty rich and supportive. And so maybe I'll go out of order, but then I'll say what the priorities are. The middle tenor voice, da, da, da. Actually, now I just realized maybe there are 5 levels. So that has to be number 1, I believe.
Right.
Then the top, very top note, which is kind of a counter melody or some counterpoint, even though it's in the top. It's slightly less important. I would say that's the second importance, and maybe the bass is tied for second importance. And then all the noodly stuff in the right hand, that has to be really subdued and underneath everything else. And it basically is here, but it'd be nice for that to even be more muffled. And it's not that I would put on the soft pedal, because the soft pedal could affect the tone of the other notes.
Yeah.
But just very
What
instead of
now?
you know.
Yeah, it goes to say, what is it about that? Why would you want that subdued versus the middle notes? Because
Well, they're
why is
very
it the
high, they're
priority?
very fast, they're going to come out anyway on their own, and they are. And then you have some chords in sort of the left hand, but in the middle, not quite in the low bass, not quite in the middle section where the main melody is, but kind of in that bass clef, beginning of the bass clef area, I guess.
And I think also I mean, like if I were to say like what is that in the music, like I would not call that the melody. I would call that the supporting factor. Like that's not, it's the it's
Which
not the
part? The
part that's,
noodly stuff
yeah, the
in the right
noodly
hand?
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's support. That's a supportive role, right? So, and it's very hard because you have basically 6 of those, and they're in a high register. Our ears tend to hear the high
Yeah.
register more clearly, and it pings out more. 6 of those for every note. There's 6 to a beat, basically.
Yeah.
So da 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 da. So those 6 have to be under every melody note that you play, and that's tough. And you're moving. It's very hard to move very quickly and very softly. Imagine running. Okay, we're gonna run a marathon right now, but you're on tippy toes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot to ask. So that's kind of what's going on. So anyway, it's good. I hear all the levels, the distinction about as I'd like, but it'd be nice to hear a tiny bit more and maybe slightly more subdued right hand filigree. That's
Okay.
what I'd say. So okay, let's keep going. I do like, so those harmonies are amazing, and I do feel that I reacted to the different harmonies quite well. That last one is amazing. I can't quite tell what that is, if it's a 2/2 diminished 7, or some suspension in there. I don't know. Some theory folks are probably going to lambaste me, but I love that sort of those extended chords.
Yeah.
Da, da, da. And I think I took just enough of a little bit more time, or just enough time there to bring that out without distorting anything. So that's a trick, is, to show something off. It's not always about making it louder. It's about where it's placed. But then you don't want to be too schmaltzy with it and place it. You don't want to
off the beat, or like
yeah. Like you could make a point and say the word here. You could say it louder. Yeah, I'm here. But you could also say I'm here. But you wouldn't want to say like I'm here. That's okay. That was a little bit too long of a pause. All right. So that's, I feel, what the musical.
Especially like you can do that kind of a pause if you say I'm here.
Exactly.
Versus I'm here. That doesn't make any sense.
Unless the composer explicitly puts something as a
right.
I mean, it's going to be a surprise, but it can't be just something like, okay, that's a little bit more emphasis. If it's so delayed, there's got to be some.
Right.
Proper amount of time.
That was a really nice section.
So let's keep going here. Okay, so this is kind of the retransition back to that main theme when it comes back. I will say this is probably my least favorite part of my performance. Is there are a couple, I mean, I get all the notes and whatnot, but some are a little bit rushed, and I wish it had this more impish quality and a little bit more build up, and a little more just placement, because I feel I'm getting too excited for what's coming. I mean, I was performing it, I was in the moment, and some of these little figurations in the middle.
Do you remember this performance to a point that you could say like that's something you noticed in the performance, or it's just in retrospect as you're listening to it, you're like,
more in retrospect? Yeah, it's very tough when you're in a performance. I mean, I knew that this was a hard spot. I'd worked on it, and I knew I tended to play this fast. But
what makes that particular section difficult to play?
Well, there are a lot of, you're very close together with the hands. There are some rests. I feel you don't have a lot of tonic or tonal support. And so it's just kind of coming out of nowhere. Like the placement after the rest, it's very tricky, and there are a lot of jumps. So just getting all that like clockwork is very tough. And I wish I had a little bit more clarity and took a little more time, because I feel that I missed a couple tiny notes in here that, or I don't know if I missed them or I just clumped them together. So when I hear it now, I feel that, yeah, this is not ideal. It's good, it's close, but I wish I would have taken a little bit more time or care with enunciating those notes, I would say.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
So let's see here. So it's interesting in this part. I actually know I do get to the downbeat a little bit fast, and that's because I found a technical trick. I have fairly large hands, and there is a note in this this big arpeggio in the right hand, and there's one note that I think a lot of people will put in the other hand, and I do it. I think they put it in their left hand. I put it in my right hand, so I'm able to get to a chord a little bit faster, but it's almost too fast. So this part, I wish I would have. It sounds like instead of bum.
Gotcha.
That I could have had a little bit more ping or something on that downbeat. Anyway. Okay, here we go.
Well, again, to get that ping, it's about rhythm. It's about like, where do you, it's really interesting. It's not about like, I mean, it's about everything. It's how you play it. It's how you play it in context. But it's also rhythm. Like rhythmically, how you place that is what makes that sound work.
The placement is important. And I think what happened is the last 2 or 3 notes of that, I went bum. Those rushed just a bit. And so that forced that time, that space to kind of compress. And then I had to come in early so that there wasn't a pause. And that was probably just done subconsciously. And now listening to it, and if I were to judge this, I would say, that's a little bit rushed. And I wouldn't mind also a tiny bit more staccato in some of these sections in the left hand. It gets a little bit more portato in terms of the articulation. So staccato is more of a short da, 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 and legato is a very smooth da, 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 and portato is somewhere in the middle, ta, ta, ta. So it's separated, but it's smooth-ish. And I feel that some of my attacks on some of these notes, or the releases rather, are a little bit too long for me at this tempo. It'd be nice to have them a little bit crisper, I would say.
Okay.
So if I were making a comment, I might say, very, very good placement. You're doing the staccatos. They could be in the left-hand section a little bit crisper.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, I'll just go back over that. I love that entry back into the main theme.
It's so
that
good.
Bass. It's so fun to play, and I think I do that part well. So I'm going to go back 2 seconds to hear it.
Oh, it's great.
It's a cool piece, and I love that sextuplet that comes in. Because before it's a quadruplet. Da, 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 da. And the first 2 times is da, 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 da. And then da, 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 da. I love how Rachmaninoff builds that.
It's so good.
Yeah, and this is going quite well. I do like the tone a lot, and it's just very rich in here. Again, just every little thing, every millisecond, I'm just wanting a little bit more perfection in terms of the clarity right now. I mean, this is still good. And when I performed it or recorded it, this was sort of the best I could do at the time. But now I'd love to just have a tiny bit, 1% more would be great.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that 1% more only takes, another, 1,000 hours of practice.
right, exactly. It's like maybe I don't know what grade I would give this. Maybe I got to 95% or something, or 93%, and so to go from 93 to 94 or to 95, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
And then to go to Ashkenazi, like maybe nobody's 100, but certainly people like Kisin and Ashkenazi and them, they're like at 99. So for me to get from 95 to 99 would be a monumental task.
And by the way, that's where like the whole 10,000 hours to become an expert is such a misnomer on both ends of the scale, because it's like, it doesn't take 10,000 hours to learn a language, or, to learn the fundamentals of something, as long as you're consistently doing it. But it also takes way more than 10,000 hours to get really good at something and stay really good and get and to go from like that 80% to 90 to 95% takes so much time and work.
Yeah. And some of us, I mean, most of us will never get to that level where the real, the greatest pianists. I sometimes delude myself into thinking for a few measures I can, play at that level, and maybe I can for a few measures or a page, but like the consistency with which they can do that all the time and keep that high energy and clarity and accuracy and consistency. I mean, it's really phenomenal. And sometimes I don't think I even appreciate it enough. But when I do hear a great performance, it's just like, I know that's great. I know I can kind of do that, but just not like that all the time and keep that level. And it's really mind boggling almost. To me. So, but anyway, this next section too is one of the harder sections. And it's a place that I wish I took a little bit more time, or was a little bit clearer, because I feel I rush a bit and as a result miss one or two tiny notes, which, don't take away. I get all the main notes, the bass notes, but there are a couple little smaller voices in the noodly stuff in the right hand where I'm not 100% happy. So let's hear this. And as a judge, like, you've already kind of probably sized up this performer by this point in the performance, but is this one of the sections that we're going to hear that maybe you go, okay, this is where I'm going to know how good of a player this guy really is? Yeah. I mean, this next part, it's hard and it's just awkward. And, this whole etude is very technically difficult the whole way through, but there are some parts that are even more technically difficult than others. Yeah. So it's the heart of the heart, and that's kind of what's coming up. So. So, okay, it wasn't maybe as bad as I
that's so good.
but it's still, there's some parts in that I just wish I could. I feel like I'd practiced it a lot and it was under my control, but if I could be more controlling in the moment, that would have been great. I felt I was just like going on adrenaline and this, okay, just go for it, just do it. And if I could be more present, I think it would be. But you know what? Here's
especially a section like that, because here's what I love about that section. Listening to it is it's kind of a. I mean, I'm not going to call it a reprise, but it definitely has like that theme that is going on. That's been going on through the whole thing. That swelling feel, that kind of. But it's like Rachmaninoff has just amped it up to a level that is completely out of control, and it's almost a purposeful thing as a composer to write something like that, where it's just like there's no way, like not that it's impossible to play, but it's impossible to like feel like you have that thing under control.
There's actually there's a piece, I think it's by Prokofiev, I can't remember it right now where it is, and the indication in the score, at least at first, it doesn't make. I'll tell you what it is. I don't think it makes sense, but then it kind of makes sense. So
okay,
it says it's already fast. It's like presto. Okay, then you get to the end section. And it says as fast as possible. Okay, and then a few bars or measures later, something that says faster. It's like, wait, what? You just told me to go as fast as possible. I can't go any faster, obviously. But the point is that, probably by that time you have so much adrenaline that you can go faster. And it just has to, when you go as fast as possible, it still has to have the feeling that, this probably could get some turbocharging to it. And
there's also something too, like I try to explain this to my students about dynamics, about how they're relative, and how like sometimes when a composer says, forte, like it's not that they literally mean a certain decibel level on the piano. What they mean is because you'll see this all the time where you'll say like forte, fortissimo, triple forte, like then you see like forte, you see another triple forte,
fortissimo or something.
Well, you see it's another triple forte, but maybe it's like it's a bigger chord, like it's supposed to be louder, right? But you've already played it the loudest possible. But it's not really about playing it decibly louder, but it's about like the audience should feel it more. And so like when you say faster and then as fast as you can and then faster, like I almost make that feel like let the audience feel like it's faster, even if it's not like if you're to like put a stopwatch on it, maybe it's not faster, but it just sounds faster. It feels faster.
It's interesting there are so many tricks, and that's what's interesting about the piano. If you see the forte, first of all, like you said, within even a forte, some things are going to be more important than others. Some harmonies are more. So does that mean they're exactly 300 hertz, whatever the decibel level is, 300 decibels? No, it's still relative in that dynamic level.
Right.
So, but there are other tricks you can do. Do you add pedal over more chords so it's more mushy, but more blurry, but still has more sound? Do you voice something more? Do you voice something less? Do you bring out more of the whole chord? Do you slow or do you soften up a little bit right before and then you get right into it? And it's like, that kind of effect. So there are many psychological ploys that you have and magic tricks, basically a lot of smoke and mirrors as pianists, where we have to kind of be magicians, not just musicians, but we have to pull out all the stops and use all those tricks to make it seem like, something's louder, even if it isn't.
Yeah.
And keep that crescendo going even if it isn't.
So whenever I'm reading a score, I always read it in the context of like, what does the composer want the audience to feel? What does what does the composer want? Like the overall, what is he trying to communicate more than what does he literally mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other than I guess notes. Right. I am a jazz player, so maybe even notes. It's not literally maybe even the notes. I know what he really meant.
No, let's not bash jazz musicians. There are a few good ones out there. No, there are a lot of good ones.
A few good ones. Michael Cooker, I hope you're listening to this.
That's hilarious. Even the notes. Well, there actually are many classical pieces too, where there are different editions with notes and ties and all that. So that even in our realm can be slightly interpreted. So it's not just jazz world. So, but you're right. That's very tough. And actually I was just thinking about this because it's such a psychological perception. There's a very good video by Two Set Violin. I don't know if we talked about them before. They're amazing.
They're great.
Yeah. There's something, how we have visual, illusions, but there are also oral illusions. And there's one, I forgot what it's called, but it sounds like the sound keeps getting higher and higher and higher. And you're like, well, how could it keep getting higher? I can still hear it. And that's a very interesting illusion. So if we can use that to our advantage when we're playing and try to kind of bring something in, then, that gets a little louder. Oh man, they're playing louder than they were before. Well, not really if you took a meter to it, but it seems like
There's a piece, and I don't know the composer. I think he's a Russian. Oh my gosh! But I remember it was so cool, and I can almost mimic the piece because I know exactly what they're doing, even though I'm not playing it. But what it is it's the sound. It's the sound of Air Force propeller World War II airplanes.
Oh, okay, cool.
And so what they do, it's really actually it's a cool effect that anybody could do on the piano if you really want to. Is you put the pedal down and you go to the low end of the piano and you just kind of like rumble it. And if you do it in a certain way and you put a little emphasis here and there and you just kind of like imagine what imagine what 45 B-52s flying overhead would sound like.
Yeah.
Like you can kind of mimic that sound, and that's what this guy did. And it's just,
Cool.
I thought it was the coolest thing. I'm like, I don't know if I could play that piece exactly, but I can make that sound.
Yeah, it's amazing the effects that you can create. And once the mind sort of picks up on something, then it's very good. Our minds are great at associations.
Yeah.
And so again, if you can play on that too, as a performer, that's great. You can convince a lot of people, even if you haven't quite done that.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
People have made whole careers doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's. I love these conversations. Look, we have a little bit of time left on this, and then we'll wrap it up. So here's the next part. So
that's such a classic Rachmaninoff ending.
I put another.
I was going to say that's such a classic Rachmaninoff ending.
But
so good.
I feel that. So I do like the climax there. There are kind of two climaxes in the piece, and it does it bum ba 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 bum. It does that in the first section, and then again at the end in the tonic key. And I feel that my setup for that is very good. I like the pacing and the sound that I get. Very big sound. I do wish the very end, dun, 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 the staccato chords, they're very tough, but I do them in tempo, but I would love to have pushed that a little bit more. I don't know if it's capable, but dun, 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 because they're all duples, and then the last one is a triplet, da, 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 dum. But it'd be nice to increase the speed, so dun, 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 da, 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 dum, something like that. A little bit more exciting. It does distort the rhythm a bit, but I think it's called for. Like you say, what does a composer mean versus what they might write? And I think there's an accelerando in there or a stringendo, but certainly the music calls for that forward momentum towards the end. So I would, if I were listening to that, I would say, okay, great. You did a good job. You have the chords. They're quite clear. They're well voiced, but it'd be nice to have a little bit more drive or momentum. I like using those kinds of words towards the final chord. Final chord's very good. So anyway, that's sort of my take on it. And what I would be writing all these comments. Of course, I don't know if I could write all the things that I said, but I would try to give some feedback and of course,
and that's the other aspect. Like as a judge, you're doing this in real time. You don't have the benefit of like stopping and pausing, talking about it.
Right. Because we've discussed this for, I don't know, 15, 20, 30, I don't know how long, but many minutes. And the piece is 3.5 minutes, barely, not even. And I would have to be writing as much as I can in that performance. So oftentimes in a judging situation, there is time between that piece and the next piece you can finish up. And then between each performer, we do get maybe a minute or 2 minutes, and we can request, can we have another minute so we can finish some of our thoughts? Yeah. And we don't get everything down. And the hope is that if you have 2, 3, 4, 5 judges listening, and at the big competitions like Clyburn, sometimes they have 10 or 12 judges, although I don't think they make comments or write comments, but all the competitions I've done, I write comments, and I tend to be, one of the most verbose. I tend to write a ton of stuff. Maybe it's too much, but I just like to give students as much feedback as I can.
Right.
It's tricky because you want to make it positive, but you want to also make it honest if they need to improve something, but say it in a nice way. And you realize that the teacher's also reading this. So you can't just say, well, this is terrible. You have a bad teacher. You don't know what you're doing. Stop piano. Even though maybe there are
told you to do it this way.
Even if there are some students where I feel like, okay, yeah, this is not, there are a lot of students where I feel there's a lot of potential and it's not being realized, and that's different. And so you have to, again, thread the needle and say it in a way where you're not insulting the student, you're not insulting the parents for making whatever decisions they've made, and you're not insulting the teacher for whatever decisions they've made. And that's tough.
Right.
to do sometimes.
But as a like in this example, when we're judging you in a sense, or as a listener, I think this is so valuable to like being able to, because I can imagine somebody who maybe they've heard this piece, maybe they haven't, but they're listening to this kind of with raw ears. Like how would they perceive this piece? And we're talking about a lot of like voicing. We're talking a lot about like tempo and rhythmic stuff that if somebody were just to listen to this, I can imagine, especially somebody not acquainted with Rachmaninoff for this piece would be like, man, that just sounds like a lot of like noise. Like it's just
noise, a lot of notes.
So it seems so random. And for you to be talking about like, finishing a phrase, and the phrase is literally over in milliseconds. Yeah. Like, what does that even mean to, so I think it's nice to be able to break this down and have people like, so I would recommend people, if you haven't listened to it, if you did listen to it and then listen to it, I would go listen to it again.
Yeah.
And see if you
listen to it all the way
through. You can hear it with new ears.
Yeah. But maybe now listen to it with some of the commentary and see if it sounds different to you. That's a good point.
Yeah. And then I would say, listen to some other versions.
Yeah, exactly. I would highly recommend. So Ashkenazi has one that I'm trying to think off the top of my head of those that I listened to a fair amount before. I think I can see him. I just forgot his name. Lugansky. I think Lugansky has one, and I think Richter's. Well, he's played them also.
I'm going to mention one just because it's it's a personal thing.
Of course.
I have. In fact, how this piece came up was you and me were talking about. I had my instructor when I was a kid growing up. He performed this piece and had one of the very few pieces he had recorded. I think it's a good recording. I think he did a really nice job.
Actually, impressively, when you sent me that, I was surprised. I had no idea when you said, "Oh, I studied with some guy back home as a kid." I was like, "Oh, okay, fine." There are a lot of guys that teach piano,
right?
And then you said he played this piece. I was like, "Oh," my ears perked up. I'm like, "Oh, so he was probably pretty good." And then you told me he played the entire opus, which is 8 etudes.
Yeah,
Opus 39. There are 8 of them. They're very tough. And then if he played all of them, then I was still skeptical, like, who is this guy?
Right.
Why haven't I heard of him? And then I heard it. I was like, yeah, that's pretty darn good.
Yeah. His name is Chip Brimhall, and he did study at Juilliard. He's an amazing pianist and one of the best teachers there in Northern California. I think he's still teaching. He's always had his hand teaching young pianists. So I was really privileged to get a chance to study with him.
It's awesome. So, what's sad is that there are, he's not known because he's so good. And then there are so many other good pianists. And
he's not alone in that story.
He's not alone. But when I heard him, I was very privileged to hear him. So.
Well, I appreciate that. So I'm actually going to put a link in there too, so people can listen to that. And I'll, Elias, if you can maybe find Richter's or one of the other ones, I'll put those.
I can find some others and send them.
I think it's so nice for people to get, once they've heard a piece, if you can listen to the same piece 2 or 3 times by different people, I think then you can kind of start to understand what it's about, what you're experiencing.
Yeah, so that's very important.
Well,
awesome.
It is. This has been so much fun. This has been, I think, a wonderful, grand entry back into, our summer break and getting into September. So, thanks, Elias, for continuing this little project with me. And this is going to be a fun year this year.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks, Mike. I love talking through this stuff. And as you see, we went forever. So
we did.
Great. Yeah.
So everyone, I hope you enjoyed the episode. We're going to have more of this kind of content. If you like it, please, share it with your friends, send it, you can subscribe. Yeah. Give it, comment. It'll be on YouTube, but also you'll find it on Podbean. You'll find us on Apple, on anywhere you have podcasts. You'll find And a Full of Remains. Just look up And a Full of Remains. Look for the blue flame. And thanks, Elias. This is going to be a great year.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.